Born on the Keldor homeworld of Doran to a family strong on the Force, Plo Koon was discovered early by the Jedi, and was taken to the Jedi Temple early in his infancy, like most Jedi of his time. Koon stood out amongst his peers, gaining a reputation for making quick and clear distinctions between right and wrong, often with little or no thought of repercussions. This attitude, in combination with his clear skill with the lightsaber, garnered the attention of the esteemed Jedi High Council member Tyvaka, who eventually took the Keldor as his Padawan learner. Following the path of a Jedi Guardian, Plo eventually passed the trials and became a knight, oftentimes taking missions that required his skill with the lightsaber rather than diplomacy. In 44 BBY, Koon and the Jedi were to negotiate peace talks between the Trade Federation and the pirate Yakko Stark. At the peak of the talks, the negotiations degenerated into a firefight. Koon was forced to watch in disbelief as Tyvaka was killed in the crossfire. These events kicked off what would become known as the Stark Hyperspace War. Koon stepped up, and along with fellow Jedi Luminar Unduli, rallied the Republic forces against this new enemy. During the Fifth Battle of Kotil, Koon along with Senator Ranulf Tarkin secured victory by trapping a majority of Stark's forces in the insect-infected mines in the Mount Avos caves. After the war, Plo Koon was given a great honor, being promoted to the rank of Jedi Master, as well as given a lifetime seat on the Jedi High Council, in honor of his master's dying wish. Koon, despite being a relatively new member of the Council, was one of their most valued members due to his knowledge and combat experience. Despite this, he oftentimes remained silent, rarely joining in debates, and simply listening to the deep discussions of his peers. For the next decade, Sidious's plan began to be put in motion, and Koon was forced to watch the growing public discontent with the Galactic Government and the Jedi Order. At the height of these tensions, Koon was present along with representatives of the High Council and the Loyalist Committee to receive a coded message from Obi-Wan Kenobi, who was trapped in the world of Geonosis and taken captive by the leaders of the newly formed Confederacy of Independent Systems. Accompanying Master Windu to Geonosis as part of a massive task force of Jedi, the group charged across the plains of Geonosis to rescue Jedi Obi-Wan Kenobi, Padawan Anakin Skywalker, and Senator Padme Amidala. Despite dueling their way through legions of battle droids at the Petronaki Arena, the Jedi were overmatched. At the last possible moment, the remaining Jedi were rescued by Master Yoda and the new Grand Army of the Republic. Much like Master Windu, Plo Koon would rally his new troops on the fields outside of the arena, leading them into the first battle of what would become known as the Clone Wars. Like almost every Jedi during the Clone Wars, Koon was enrolled in the Republic Army as a Jedi General. Master Plo achieved many great victories during the war, including the battles of Brentel 4 and Boss Pity, no thanks in part to his skills as a military leader. At the twilight of the war, Supreme Chancellor Palpatine revealed his alter ego as the Dark Lord of the Sith, Darth Sidious, and put the final motion of his plan into effect. While leading his men during the battle over Cato Nemoidia, Koon was betrayed and gunned down in accordance with Contingency Order 66. Like all Jedi killed during Order 66, Koon's execution was fabricated in order to spin anti-Jedi propaganda in favor of Emperor Palpatine's takeover. Official Imperial records stated that Koon's death was a result of a suicidal terrorist attack on a Nemoidian grub nursery. Shado Vao came from humble beginnings and was orphaned along with his sister when their parents' ship crash-landed on the planet Vandexa. Eventually, the pair were rescued by the Imperial Mission, an organization created by Jagged Fel as part of the Victory Without War program, whose goal was to peacefully spread Imperial influence by providing aid to people and planets ruined by war, and to help those generally in poverty. While his sister stayed behind and became a missionary herself, Shado left and was eventually recruited by the Jedi Order. Shado impressed early well on Ossus, and soon became apprenticed to the revered Jedi Master and High Council member, Cole Skywalker. Despite his young age, Vao became known for his exceptional lightsaber skills, with both a single blade or with the less traditional double-bladed variant. Shado also became close friends with his master's son, Cade. Vao would once again experience tragedy in his young life, as in 130 ABY, days before the end of the Sith Imperial War, the Sith had one final move to make. The meeting on Ossus was originally supposed to be a simple diplomatic meeting between the Jedi and the Empire in order to fix ties and even maybe form an alliance. However, Darth Krayt pulled his strings, and Imperial forces attacked the Jedi, turning it into a massacre and marking the beginning of the Third Jedi Purge. During the battle, Master Skywalker and Master Sazen fought the oncoming attacks while Shado and Cade moved the Jedi younglings off planet. When the group reached orbit, Cade sensed his father's death, and overcome with anger, left the shuttle one final time, clearing a path in an effort to allow it to escape into hyperspace. Cade was seemingly killed when his craft was shot down, and Shado was forced to abandon his good friend. Following the massacre, Master Sazen finished Shado's training, and the Jedi left going into hiding. Vao, like most Jedi, remained in hiding until he reunited with Master Sazen on Vendexa, when they discovered that Cade had actually survived Ossus. After some convincing, Cade agreed to take up his training once again, and the group eventually made their way to the hidden Jedi temple on Tavias. Here, Skywalker announced his plan to assassinate Darth Krayt, and although the remaining Jedi didn't agree with his plan, they did not stop him either. Shado went with his friend as part of the strike team, along with Celeste Morn, Azlyn Ray, and Imperial Knights Ganner Krieg and Antares Draco. There on Hadabaddon, Krayt took the bait, and Shado dueled Darth Maladi, and it seemed Krayt had died during the fight. After this, Vao worked to further destabilize Krayt's inner circle, helping to create an alliance between the Fel Empire and the Jedi, as well as joining an attack on the Sith homeworld of Korriban, led by Antares Draco. Just when all seemed to be looking up, the unthinkable happened. Darth Krayt had survived, and returned with a vengeance. After defending the hidden temple from Sith forces, Vao and the survivors decided to launch an attack on the now vulnerable Coruscant, in hopes of killing Darth Krayt. During the attack, Vao led ground forces, and managed to defeat countless Sith troopers. Following Cade's success in defeating Krayt once and for all, Vao helped the Jedi join the newly formed Galactic Triumvirate, and a new era of peace was on the horizon. Plo Koon was a well-built Keldor male hailing from the planet Doran. While Koon's exact age is never stated, and despite claiming he was 382 Keldor years old, due to the fact that he was a contemporary of Qui-Gon Jinn, we can estimate that he is around the same age as the Maverick, which would place Koon at around 73 years of age at the time of Order 66. Keldors were a tall race, although typically the same height and weight as humans. Keldors featured peach skin, as well as dark black eyes, although some were born with silver irises, a mark that was often seen as an affinity for the Force. Compared to other species around the known galaxy, they were equipped with heightened reflexes, a result of the extrasensory organs in their heads, but also a weaker constitution. Due to Doran having a unique atmosphere composed of helium and a gas unique to their home world, the Keldors were forced to wear a breath mask and protective goggles whenever in atmospheres of a different composition. And finally, Keldors were also said to communicate with their minds using a form of telepathy, a trait that helped boost Koon's own telepathic Jedi abilities, something we will cover later on. According to the Ultimate Alien Anthology, Keldors age at a similar rate to that of humans, placing Koon in the vulnerable category. Despite his advanced age, Koon showed no signs of it hampering him, demonstrating multiple times through the various battles of the Clone Wars. Koon's best physical attribute in my eyes came in the form of his strength and agility. His strength was something he utilized heavily, and could throw large objects around with little to no difficulty. The best example of this can be seen when he threw a criminal over his head, with enough force to crack glass and leave the creature unconscious. His agility was also not what you would expect from a man his age. This allowed him to keep up with much more nimble and younger combatants, as seen on Korm against Asajj Ventress. The Jedi Master's speed was also not lacking, and he has been seen speed blitzing opponents on occasion. The most prominent example being when he did so against noted Jedi killer Aurra Sing, before she could even fire on him. Koon's species, as mentioned earlier, also granted him heightened reflexes. This allowed Koon to think and react at superhuman levels, and combined with his Jedi training, allowed him to be very proficient in this field. However, his constitution is a weakness I feel he has not overcome. While Koon may have a high resilience to pain, he is susceptible to damage, and his body can break down if attacked in the right way. This can be seen once again against Ventress, where the Jedi breaks his arm, but shrugs it off and keeps moving forward. the broken arm being an annoyance more than anything else. And finally, no matter how strong his connection to the Force, there was one glaring weakness Koon had, that being his face mask. If this mask was damaged in any way, Koon would become effectively blind, and his lung would begin to spaz and eventually collapse. Although this weakness has only been exploited once, being done by Savage Opress of all people, it is still an obvious weakness that leaves the Jedi Master defenseless. Overall, Plo Koon developed a well-rounded physical makeup. His strength, agility, and dexterity allow him to fight against high-level opposition, even despite his elderly age. He may not look like much, but Master Plo is a classic example of don't judge a book by its cover. Shado Vao was a male Twi'lek of unknown age. However, due to the fact that he's a contemporary of Cade Skywalker, we can infer that he is roughly 22 years of age come time of the Legacy War arc. Twi'leks were a humanoid species originating from the planet of Ryloth, and were distinguished by their two-head tails and skin tones that ranged anywhere from the common blue Rushian Twi'leks to the incredibly rare red Lethan Twi'leks. They were a relatively strong and agile species, though possessing no trait that stands out, unlike Zabraks or Nautilans, who were both known for their incredible resiliency. The twin head tails were not cosmetic either, and actually contained part of the Twi'lek's brain. This created a glaring weakness in combat, as the tails were highly sensitive, and grabbing them forcefully was so painful that it could easily incapacitate almost any Twi'lek, and in some cases even cause lasting brain damage. Vao's best attributes came in the form of his advanced speed and agility. His speed was impressive, and oftentimes used it to push the pace in his duels, such as he did against Darth Maladi, and could keep up with the quickest of combatants, as shown in his ability to match the speed of Darth Talon, Talon being known for her incredible speed. His agility, in my opinion, was his greatest strength. He demonstrated this on multiple occasions, doing so to dodge blaster fire while training, outmaneuvering his way against a group of rat ghouls, and finally, dancing circles around an Acklay on Vendexa. His resiliency isn't explored too much due to the fact that Shado very rarely gets hit, but from what we do have, it is solid, if unspectacular. That said, he has managed to survive for years under constant persecution from the Sith, as well as get right back up unaffected after being blasted by a force push by Darth Talon. His strength wasn't lacking either, but much like his resiliency, it isn't anything unlike that of your average Jedi Master. The best showings of this can be seen during the attack on Coruscant, when he matched the strength of Darth Krayt's Sith troopers, the troopers possessing ridiculous strength, augmented through cybernetic implants. On the whole, Shado Vao possessed a physical profile perfect for his fighting style, and could keep up with any opponent in this arena. This round is both unique and fairly easy to call. It's unique in the sense that we have two aliens going up against one another, which is surprisingly only the second time this has happened on my channel, the others coming all the way back in Season 1, being Kit Fisto vs Wolf Sazen, and Darth Maul vs Darth Nihil. Back to this matchup, however. When comparing the two species, I think it's safe to say that Vao has the edge. Where Twi'leks are very comparable to humans and have a solid physical set, Keldor's weaker constitution in a contest such as this does hurt them. On top of all that, while the head tails do present a weakness of Vao, it is nowhere near as debilitating as Koon's mask. Vao could fight through his weakness with sheer will, but if Koon's mask were ever removed or damaged, he is absolutely defenseless and would die in minutes. When we look at the individual traits as well, it clearly favors Vao. The glaringly obvious one staring us right in the face is their age. While Koon is still effective on the battlefield, he is still in the final stages of his life, and his physical prime has clearly passed him. Shado, on the other hand, is just entering his, and he will not tire nor break down as easily. He gets the edge speed and agility-wise as well. Koon isn't a strength-based brute that only remains stationary, but Vao specializes in outmaneuvering his opponents, and his individual showings are far superior to that of Koon's. With that being said, it should be noted that Koon can hang with these types of opponents. His showings against Ventress are a prime example, but still, Vao is the far more agile of the two. Vao gets the edge in durability. His body has held up time and time again, and while Koon's has for the most part as well, his advanced age and his species' inherited weaknesses still create potential red flags for the Keldor. The only edge I see Koon holding in this contest comes with his strength. And even with that, it's not like it's the craziest display of strength the galaxy has ever seen, and Vao would be able to manage. Ultimately, Vao's superior physical traits, combined with Master Plo's obvious red flags physically, give Shado the edge. Shado Vao gets the edge. Plo Koon was considered to be one of the most militaristic and dangerous combatants in the Jedi Order. His skills with the lightsaber were highly regarded amongst his peers, and has proven it time and time again, from the Stark Hyperspace War to the front lines of the Clone Wars, in turn gaining a reputation as one of the greatest swordsmen of his era. His talent with the blade even caught the attention of the Sith Lord Darth Maul, who, despite his own incredible arrogance, considered a battle with him to be a true test of his own skills. Noted for his solid strength, it should surprise no one that Master Plo was a master in the fifth form of classical lightsaber combat, the Gem So. He did not stop there either, and according to the Star Wars The Clone Wars campaign guide, also mastered the other Form 5 variant, Xian. Also known as the Way of the Krayt Dragon, Form 5 was developed by practitioners of Form 3, who felt that the defensive-minded form unnecessarily extended time spent in combat by forcing its users to wait for an opportunity to strike, rather than create their own openings. Djemso was designed to use an opponent's attack against them, as seen by Djemso's emphasis on immediate counterattacks, bringing the force of their opponent's own blow against them, and seeking to dominate the duel. Xian was described as being well adept to guard against blaster fire and enemy strikes without compromising one's ability to launch powerful counterattacks. The style worked best when countering attacks from multiple opponents, and was typically less effective against a single adversary. With its focus on repelling blaster fire, Xian kept in mind that the Jedi were often outnumbered by their opponents, and needed to defend themselves while retaining offensive capability. Koon also supplemented his specialization of Form 5 with the fourth form of lightsaber dueling, Ataru. Form 4 was fast-paced and effective against single opponents, though weaker in prolonged combat and confined spaces. Ataru was characterized by force-assisted acrobatics, such as somersaults and leaping strikes, both for attack and defense. Form 4 allowed the user to use their entire body as an offensive weapon, as unarmed strikes were combined with flourishing blade work. Despite Ataru not appearing as a direct focal point of his style, only really using the unarmed aspects of the style, it did point to Koon having a wide knowledge base. In order to use these forms effectively, Plo Koon was equipped with a standard single-bladed lightsaber. The weapon was relatively simple in design, and was strikingly similar to those of Master Kit Fistos and Luminara Undulis. It had hand grips near the top of the weapon, as well as blue radiator grooves, a very unique feature. Originally, Plo powered this weapon with a single yellow crystal, most likely of natural origin. By the time of Attack of the Clones, however, Koon replaced it with a standard blue Elim crystal. This provided his weapon with more maneuverability, at the expense of cutting power. During the Clone Wars, Koon, like many Jedi fighting side by side with clone troopers, took to wearing modified clone trooper armor. Unlike Masters Kenobi and Skywalker, however, Koon only took to wearing the gauntlets. This was only for a time, and by Revenge of the Sith, Koon had gone back to his traditional Jedi robes. Sticking with his preferred form's philosophy, Koon was primarily a dedicated power duelist first and foremost. Koon's best demonstration of this style came against Asajj Ventress. He managed to match the Sith assassin blow for blow, while also nursing a broken arm. This feat becomes even more impressive when we take into account that Ventress matched Obi-Wan Kenobi for a majority of the Clone Wars, straight up bested other council members Kit Fisto and Luminara Unduli, and even managed to contend with Mace Windu, one of the greatest swordsmen in the history of the Jedi Order. Offensively, the Keldor was very direct, utilizing strong and forceful attacks with a high level of accuracy. However, his blade work was oftentimes slow and cumbersome. Speed was not a focal point, instead relying on precision and timing, in turn preferring less output and more accuracy, rather than sheer volume. While he is a strength-based duelist, as I've mentioned earlier, he isn't some stationary fighter who can't move. Koon used his strength and endurance primarily well in the attack, using his agility and acrobatics to outmaneuver opponents and strike them down. This approach can be seen in his duel against Savage Opress, which he used to great success, clearly working over the hulking giant until Opress became desperate and removed Koon's breath mask. However, his main focus was always his strength-based attacks, trying to overpower and cleave his way through an opponent's guard. Defensively, once again, he sticks to the teachings of Dejem So. He would plant his feet and meet an oncoming attacker head on, holding his ground until an opening presented itself where he could counterattack. Koon would also use his agility in attempts to outmaneuver his opponents, and once more gain the offensive. As a master of Xian, it should surprise no one that he was highly adept in blast deflection, in multiple skirmishes, having redirected fire back at his assailants. Another strength of Xian comes in the form against multiple adversaries, and Koon is no exception. He has proven this time and time again on the front lines of two of the most crucial conflicts of his day. In conjunction with his blade work, Koon often incorporated unarmed strikes into his sequences. This was done in the form of either a punch, kick, or even a vicious headbutt. Despite having a proficiency for this skill, the Jedi Master also had a slight weakness to these strikes, being affected greatly by them in both his duels with Ventress and Savage. While his use of unarmed combat wasn't overly common in his style, incorporating his force powers was, and was featured heavily in his fights. He demonstrated his skill with this along with other council members, including Grandmaster Yoda, in a martial arts exhibition match, intended to showcase superiority in the Force over technique. This mindset Koon followed, and used his force powers in conjunction with his martial skill, unlocking all of the possible tools in his arsenal. Tactically, Koon was brilliant. He proved this time and time again, leading Republic forces to an unlikely victory during the Stark Hyperspace War, and then making many split-second decisions on the front lines of the Clone Wars. The best case of this came during the Battle of Korm, where he kept Ventress occupied, not allowing her to reinforce her troops, while Koon's own forces captured their target. This tactical mind also usually followed the philosophy that a good offense is a good defense. Koon did have a glaring weakness with his tactics, however. When Master Plo develops a plan, he charges forward and sees it till its completion, trusting his judgment and assuming the plan would be a success, similar to that of the tactics employed by Jedi Master Ki-Adi-Mundi. While oftentimes this approach was successful, it did nearly get him killed against Savage. This isn't to say his tactical mind is bad, because it most certainly isn't, but it does show that at times it can backfire against him. At the end of the day, Master Plo was no doubt one of the better swordsmen of his day. He was equipped with a variety of skills, each of which he uses well, making him a very well-rounded and dangerous opponent. Shado Vao was widely considered to be one of the most formidable swordsmen of his day. As of Star Wars Legacy Claws of the Dragon, Shado had supposedly not yet found his equal in skill with the lightsaber blade. While this may not totally be accurate, accounting for Shado's contemporaries, who he has fought with or against, Cade Skywalker, Cole Skywalker, Darth Talon, and Wolf Sazen, this is still a considerable accolade. His natural talent in this field was seen even from an early age, as at only 14 years of age, managed to carve his way through groups of Sith during the massacre at Ossus. Although his lightsaber style is unfortunately never stated, there is more than enough evidence where I was able to construct a solid idea of what Shado may have employed. After looking over certain issues of the Legacy comic series, as well as discussions with Forklifter Matt, I believe that Shado was a master in both Form 4 Taru, as well as the Xian variant of Form 5. This was ultimately due to Shado's use of acrobatics and aggressive flourishing blade work, as well as his occasional use of the reverse hand grip. Form 4 Taru was fast-paced and effective against single opponents, though weaker in prolonged combat and confined spaces. Ataru was characterized by force-assisted acrobatics, such as somersaults and leaping strikes, both for attack and defense. Form 4 allowed the user to use their entire body as an offensive weapon, as unarmed strikes were combined with flourishing blade work. Form 5 Xian was described as being well adept to guard against blaster fire and enemy strikes, without compromising one's ability to launch powerful counterattacks. The style worked best when countering attacks from multiple opponents, and was typically less effective against a single adversary. It is my personal belief that Vao took the elements of Xian to compensate for Ataru's inherited weaknesses, in turn granting him a style with very few flaws. The Twi'lek's lightsaber was also a very unique piece of weaponry. At first glance, the weapon appeared to resemble nothing more than a standard single-bladed lightsaber, if only slightly longer. In reality, however, it was an ingenious design, and when needed, the weapon would elongate into a double-bladed lightsaber. Powering this weapon was most likely either 2 or 4 blue Adegan crystals, which gave his weapon more maneuverability, at the expense of cutting power. Vao's prowess in this approach gained the respect of all around them, even the Imperial Knights, primarily Ganner Krieg, Ron Fell's second greatest knight. This is even more notable when we take into account that Creed believed that Shado could surpass Antares Draco should he become an Imperial Knight. And we all know my high opinions of Draco as a martial artist from my last video. Also, if you haven't seen that, go check it out. Offensively, Vao had two different approaches. The first would be with only one blade of his weapon activated. This approach focused more on strength and speed. He was still quick and agile, but his Ataru strikes came in with much more strength and ferocity, attempting to slice through his foe. This style was similar to that of a young Obi-Wan Kenobi during the events of the Phantom Menace, utilizing strong up-tempo and calculated blade work in conjunction with the occasional acrobatic. He displayed this approach during the ambush on Deluge, using it effectively against multiple Sith minions, as well as in a sparring match against Cade on Ossus. He often started with this approach as well, either due to his prowess with a single blade, or, in my opinion, for the element of surprise. When he did ignite his second blade, we begin to see Vao incorporate many more acrobatics in his approach, as well as once again primarily using Form 4. He would begin with two hands on his weapon and engage his opponent in a more traditional saber staff approach. He would continue to be up-tempo and consistently in his foe's face, and his blade work would be incredibly dynamic and calculated, similar to Darth Maul's during the Duel of the Fates. However, when the opportunity presented itself, Shado's style would become extremely unorthodox. He would have one hand on the weapon, sometimes using the reversed hand grip of Form 5, and rapidly spin the blade, confusing his opponent and making his blade strikes incredibly random and unpredictable. Due to only having one hand on his weapon, this approach made power strikes less viable, instead focusing on dexterity and speed. This was his go-to approach when engaging against most single opponents, doing so against both Darths Talon and Maladi, some of Krait's best Sith in his one Sith Order. Shado's overall approach in combat reminds me a lot of Exar Kun. Both start off wielding a single blade, before becoming more and more unorthodox with their saber staffs. Not to mention, both are incredibly technical swordsmen, having very few flaws in their forms. When engaging multiple adversaries, Vao would use his skills in Form 5 Xian. He would use the Form 5 technique called Xian Deflection, which allowed him to simultaneously deflect incoming lightsaber strikes and use his incredible acrobatic skills to launch himself toward the next opponent. He demonstrated this art countless times, however the best example came during the Battle of Coruscant, fighting off a virtually endless number of Sith troopers. This feat is even more impressive when we take into account the strong dark side influence of the Sith Temple, which weakens light side users such as Jedi, as well as considering that the Sith troopers are skilled enough in combat to easily slay other Jedi and Sith. Despite specializing in a form known primarily for its offense, Shado was not lacking defensively. He would meet his attacker head-on, before finding an opportunity to counterstrike. When he did find this opening, he would use his superior agility to outmaneuver his opposition, and once more unleash his terrifying offensive. Against blaster-wielding foes, Shado was also not lacking. Despite going up against mostly saber-wielding foes, and his primary form being inheritedly weak to blaster fire, Shado overcame this weakness, not allowing a flaw in his form to emerge. Although incorporating physical strikes into your sequences was a primary aspect of Ataru, Vao took a slightly differing approach. While he still did do this, he obviously preferred incorporating force-based attacks into his lightsaber sequences instead. This oftentimes came in the form of telekinesis, incorporating another aspect that his opponents needed to take into account. Tactically, Vao was very adept. He would analyze his opponent's approach, and then make split-second decisions to counter. He also did not have tunnel vision, and was more than aware of his surroundings, and even used it to his advantage, such as he did to Cade, using the Force to trap his leg with a nearby plant root. As an overall martial artist, I would place him on the same tier as Asajj Ventress. Both were incredibly gifted with the blade in their hand, and could best many Council tier masters, while also holding up against the absolute best the era has to offer. All in all, Shado Vao was a very special martial artist, and his unique style, in conjunction with his natural skill and tactical mind, make him a very tough outing for nearly anyone. This round is tough. Both Plo Koon and Shado Vao were among the most talented and respected swordsmen of their era. Each possessed different tools, but used them in order to achieve their specific goals in combat. Starting from the top, each combatant wields a relatively standard lightsaber. Although Vao's can turn into a double-bladed variant, it does not grant him any sort of advantage, as Master Plo is too skilled and has proven that he can handle these type of weapons, as shown in his duels with Ventress and Savage. Offensively, Koon was direct, using strong and accurate blade work, whereas Vao had multiple different approaches that emphasized speed and agility. I give Vao the edge here, and it comes down to his unorthodox double-bladed approach. This style would have been something Koon had never experienced before, and would force him to slow his own offensive in order to analyze. While he has gone up against saber-staffs before, those approaches were more calculated in Ventress's case, and strength-based in Savage's case, whereas Vao's approach has many layers, using his advanced speed and dexterity. Vao will also have much more volume compared to Plo, which the longer the contest goes on, the more likely he is to land a crippling blow. Koon's offense will be very smart, and always on target, which will force Vao to defend with razor-sharp efficiency. However, he still has the edge offensively, due to his style and having more at his disposal. Defensively, both are very sound, except once again, defend in much very different ways. Where Koon uses the teachings of the Jemso, planting his feet and meeting an oncoming attacker head-on, holding his ground, Vao would use his superior agility and attempt to outmaneuver his foes, and once more, get back on the offensive. Both are even in this field, capable of holding their own, and doing so in ways that highlight their strengths. Tactically, I'd say Koon has a slight edge, due to his experience. That said, it's close, and if Koon picks the wrong tactic, it will cost him in this matchup. This round is super close, but I am leaning towards Vao. Both are very technical, and deserve their status as masters of the blade. In the end, Vao I just feel like has more at his disposal in this field, and once Plo attacks once or twice, he will have shown Vao all he is capable of. On the contrary, Vao could start with his single blade, go to a standard double-bladed approach, and finally his unorthodox one, which I feel will give Koon trouble to start. Ultimately, it's this diversity, as well as his overall output, that grant him the edge. I give the slight edge to Shado Vao. Coming from a family with strong ties to the Force, Plo Koon was heralded as one of the wisest Jedi of his day, and employed a multitude of different abilities. Due to his inborn Keldor tendency to view issues in black and white, Koon used the Force as a means to strike out at injustice, and employed it in a much more offensive manner than most Jedi of his day. Like all Force wielders, Koon was able to use the Force to augment his physical attributes, and paired it with Force Valor, boosting his own speed, strength, and dexterity. In terms of telekinesis, the Clone Wars campaign guide credits Koon with being a savant, and with good reason. He is more than capable of the standard Force pushes and shoves, and grips, as well as the more advanced applications of telekinesis, such as Force Choke, Force Crush, Force Repulse, and even Force Wave. His skill in Force Crush and Force Repulse are prime examples of his tendency to use the Force in more offensive and violent means. For starters, Force Crush was one of the most violent Force abilities known to the Sith and the Jedi. This deadly technique lifted the opponent into the air, and as they were floating, their body would implode as it was crushed by the Force. As for Force Repulse, it is an extremely powerful telekinetic Force power, similar in function to Force Push, but on a far larger scale. Force Repulse was no more or less than a gigantic telekinetic explosion. The user would concentrate in the Force, and violently push it outwards, creating rapid expanding kinetic ripples through space, flinging nearby objects away at a high velocity. Telekinesis was Koon's go-to in the midst of combat, and has been seen sending enemies flying with it. On one occasion, disabling a dwarf spider droid, using a Force Wave knocking over many B-1 battle droids, and finally, managing to rip through the shields of other trained Force wielders, launching Asajj Ventress into next week. Along with the likes of Siase Tin, and everyone's favorite Death Star chef Yarael Poof, Koon was known for his strong telepathic abilities. Along with his natural talent in this field, his Keldor physiology boosted these skills even more, due to their highly developed extrasensory organs, which enhanced a Force user's power. Koon was a master of the classic Jedi mind trick. He took this ability to its highest levels, and could compel subjects to do his bidding, as well as on a few occasions, erasing his own existence. Koon also had no troubles in probing the minds and ripping information from others. The best case of this can be seen during the Stark Hyperspace War, when he managed to do this to the pirate Jaco Stark, managing to learn of the pirates' plans through the course of the war, all without being noticed. He even managed to plant information in Stark's mind, in turn coercing his surrender and helping to end the war. If this wasn't enough, the Jedi Master was also able to communicate telepathically to others across the galaxy, doing so with his niece, as well as to Ahsoka Tano, giving her his exact location after his Starfleet was obliterated by the Malevolence. Due to his Barrandau training, his defense against these attacks were also exceptional, able to resist mind tricks, as well as mental torture. In terms of more exoteric abilities, Koon was a master in altering the environment around him, able to use the Force to create fog or ice. In addition to this, The Clone Wars campaign guide credits him with the skill in the rare art of Malacia. Malacia was a force technique that was used to induce a powerful dizziness and nausea in enemies by turning their equilibrium against them. It was completely incapacitating, but caused no damage to the actual body. While an impressive technique, Koon has not been seen employing it in combat, and I think it's safe to say he isn't on the level of Obo Rancisis when it comes to this ability. Finally, Koon was a practice hand in his own variant of Force Lightning, which he dubbed Electric Judgment. Despite learning about the power as an initiate in the Jedi Temple, Koon never had any desire to further experiment with this ability. That all changed during a mission to capture the known criminal known as Dreed Pommel. After cornering the criminal, Pommel out of desperation took a young girl hostage and killed her entire family. During this encounter, Koon let out a barrage of lightning at Pommel's head, and then a second burst of lightning that knocked him unconscious. After using the power, Koon reported to the Jedi Council that he had not felt any anger or fear as he let out the blast of Force Lightning, but was indeed calm and in control of his emotions. After much meditation, Koon concluded that it would be wrong for him to ignore this power, and instead began to develop it into a useful technique. Electric Judgment involved spraying electric bolts of varying intensity from the hands and fingers of the user at a desired target. Once the bolts made contact, they caused immense pain and knocked them unconscious. While a powerful technique, Darth Plagueis claimed that it was significantly less powerful than that of traditional Sith lightning, leading me to believe that it could not be used for lethal purposes. Despite this, it was still a useful tool in the Jedi's moveset, and its golden bolts of lightning were not something one would want to be on the receiving end of. Koon also had some defensive powers, credited as a master in Tutaminis. In conclusion, Plo Koon was a highly adept force wielder, and along with being a very practical one, was as well a very adept combative one, and would use all the tools he had to achieve victory. Despite primarily being a martial artist, Shado Vao still had some solid force abilities at his disposal. Like all force wielders, Vao was able to use the force to augment his physical attributes, and paired it with force valor, boosting his own speed, strength, and dexterity. Vao's most advanced use of the force came in his use of telekinesis. He could perform force pushes, shoves, and grips with no difficulty, and had no difficulty in moving large objects around. In addition to this, the Twi'lek often incorporated these attacks into his lightsaber sequences, ripping through the shields of other trained force wielders. He did this against Cadwell and Ossus, as well as to numerous Sith troopers during the attack on the hidden Jedi Temple. His telepathic abilities, while nothing special, were also fairly competent. He was a master of the classic Jedi mind trick, and had no difficulty using it to influence the minds of weak-minded foes. This can be seen while on Ossus, when he used the ability on 2 stormtroopers patrolling the old Jedi Temple. In addition, his force sense was quite strong. While nowhere near the range of Kavar or Darth Barris, Vao was still impressive, and managed to identify Rackles through the Force before any other Force wielder aboard the ship could. At the end of the day, while he didn't have a wide range of abilities, he took what he had and made the best of it. By incorporating many of these abilities into his lightsaber sequences, he made himself quite a formidable adversary. This one I think is pretty obvious. While both Plo Koon and Shado Vao followed the path of a Jedi Guardian, only one took the time to develop more than their martial skill. Breaking it down from the top, both combatants are skilled with telekinesis, and can move large objects around with little difficulty. Both were also able to use this power subtly, and in conjunction with their lightsaber strikes. While on the surface the pair appear to be close, Koon holds the clear edge here. This is primarily due to the fact that Vao has only shown basic force pushes and shoves, whereas Koon was regarded as a telekinetic savant, employing more advanced applications, such as Force Choke, Force Crush, Force Repulse, and Force Wave. While Vao does have skills in telepathy, it really doesn't go farther than the basic Jedi mind trick, and a solid Force sense. Koon, on the other hand, has probed the minds and ripped information from his foes, communicated with others from across the galaxy, as well as being able to resist mind tricks and mental torture. All of this on top of the fact that his Keldor philosophy boosted his proficiency in this field. After this, however, Shado has really, well, nothing, whereas Koon has more advanced force powers such as Malacia and Electric Judgment. I will give Shado some slack here, however, as Koon rarely, if ever, has employed Malacia, and if Shado can defend effectively against Sith Lightning, I think it's safe to say he can defend against Koon's variant. With that said, these attacks add another layer to Koon's attack, and will force Vao to think about what Koon will throw his way. While I can defend Vao when it comes to Malaysia and Electric Judgment, that still doesn't make up for the fact that Master Plo is better in every single field that Shado is proficient in. And to be honest, I don't think it's very close. If this was an MMA fight, this would be a clear 10-8 round in favor of Master Plo. Plo Koon gets the edge. And finally, we have come to the verdict. If these two Jedi Knights were to ever face off, who would win? Let's set up this fight. Let's say it takes place in the spice mines of Kessel, with the winner winning a solid 7 out of 10 times. The two Jedi would cross paths, and after some slight talk, the two would ignite their blue blades. Koon would begin in his defensive stance, and Shado would lunge at the Keldor with only one of his blades activated. Shado charged in, focused on using his strength and speed. Koon planted his feet and met the incoming attacks, knocking them all away. Koon was taking his time, analyzing his young opponent, and attempting to locate a flaw in the Twi'lek's otherwise perfect form. The early fight goes slightly to Vao. This isn't because he was dominating Master Plo, rather due to the fact that he was in control of the fight. He would use his first approach, focusing more on strength and speed. He would still be quick and agile, but his Ataru strikes came with much more strength and ferocity, attempting to slice through his foe. That said, Plo's defense was holding up, and was waiting for the perfect time to launch his own offensive. The mid-fight would begin when Plo lands a nasty punch that stuns Vao, who is then force-pushed across the mine. Vao gets up and shows a slight smile. Lengthening his weapon, he activates the other blade of his weapon, and charges at the elderly Jedi Master. Koon once again stands pat, and meets him head-on. Unlike last time, however, Koon doesn't just sit back, instead, countering Vao whenever he gets the chance. Vao was attacking in a more traditional saber staff approach. He would continue to be up-tempo and constantly in his foe's face, and his blade work would be incredibly dynamic and calculated. The mid-fight in my eyes is a relative draw, as neither combatant is truly gaining any ground. Vao would be in his relatively standard saber staff approach, and while many have fallen to him while applying this approach, Master Plo would not be another statistic. Koon has seen this style before. His bouts with Ventress replayed in his mind, and he was able to match Vao. Neither would try and use physical attacks, and only Plo would occasionally mix in a force attack. At the height of the duel, Vao soon became far more random and unpredictable. He was no longer wielding his traditional approach, but instead, his unorthodox one. He span his blade quickly, and his output was now becoming incredibly random and unpredictable. This began to shift the tide in his favor, as Koon now began to sit back and try to counter this new approach. Koon, recognizing this, began to try and implement his force powers more, in an attempt to throw his opponent off his game. However, this attempt proved to be futile. The Keldor also realized he needed to end the fight. The longer it dragged on, the more of a chance his body had of failing him. Shado then suddenly faints. Koon buys it, and goes to counterattack. Before he knew it, however, Vado's blade was spinning, and then there was nothing. This fight ultimately comes down to Koon's weak constitution, and Vao's advantage with the blade. Plo Koon is a very talented martial artist, and his resume has many very respectable victories. However, at this stage in the game, once he shows his first couple attacks, he will have shown everything he has. His only route to victory here is hoping one of his strikes land. Considering he doesn't throw a lot anyways, and against a martial artist like Vao, who in most cases manages to control his fights, Koon will have less and less of a chance to actually land a killing blow. He will also have to slow down once Vao moves to his unorthodox double-bladed style, further limiting his opportunities. Vao's output also increases the chance that Koon's body fails him. The more Vao lands, the more opportunity Koon gets an injury. The only thing in my eyes Koon really has going for him here is his advantage in the Force, and he doesn't utilize his abilities that would really have an impact on this matchup, primarily sticking with his proficiency in TK. Vao's skill with the blade is no joke, and if he took time to develop his skills as a Force wielder, he could be one of the biggest challenges for anyone of any era. Luckily for him, however, his opponent's increasing age and reluctance to use most of his obscure Force powers tips the tide in his favor more and more. Koon isn't a bad combatant, far from it. But against an opponent like Vao, a younger, a hungrier, and a more aggressive combatant, it's hard to see him winning more times than not. I declare, Shado Vao, the Twi'lek Sword Master, the victor.